Are your mixing skills getting in the way of your success? Do you find that you have good ideas, but the end result is just not sounding as awesome as you know it could be, as you know it should be? If so, what can you do about it? That's what we want to discuss in today's episode, number 45 of the Make Music Income podcast. I'm here with my buddy Eric Copeland. My name is Stevie B, and I'm going to look back today and discuss three of my approaches or ideas that have really kind of helped me improve the quality of my mixing to a point where they're competitive with the other tracks on the marketplaces that I'm working with. And Eric's going to discuss some of his ideas as well. But before we jump into it, as always, Eric, why don't you give the audience a little rundown of your week? What's been going on?
Hello, audience. It's been a normal, fun, crazy week here, starting with some non-exclusive library things. Motion Array had a brief up for Twilight Zone type music, and that
I
just
heard that
struck
on your
me.
live stream.
That just struck me, and I decided to do a little something, and I actually did it while we were in class. They were all working on MIDI things, and so I just started messing around on Logic, and lo and behold, came up with something very, very obtuse and 12-tone, and there's not much tonality to it, but it's fun. I kind of took the Twilight Zone version that I remember from growing up by the Manhattan Transfer that was like this disco version. It had this going through the whole thing like this kick drum, and I just made that the center of the universe for this thing, and then everything was just happening around the kick drum, and all sorts of percussion and sounds. And so put that up and got it approved. It's a beautiful thing when you put something up to Motion Array and the very next morning you wake up and it's approved. And so that's what happens with those briefs. It's kind of like a 3-in-1, as I described on my blog or on my vlog the other day. You get it right in to the library. You get it there forever, and it's a Halloween song-ish, so it could be used for Halloween and things like that. So it's going to be ultimately useful all the time. And the third thing is that what is the third thing? It's in quick. It's Halloween, and there's a possibility of a bonus if somebody decides that they like it and can use it. Now, it seems like to me the bonuses happen early, like for the early tracks, and mine was late to the party. You can still submit to it now, is the funny thing, and you can submit. So to me, sometimes even if there is no bonus possible, I look at it as a way to get something in quickly.
Yeah, I wonder how they calculate I wonder how they decide who's going to get the bonuses. Whether it's like,
I think it has to do with whoever the client was that initiated the brief from them and what they picked to use. And I believe that's how it happens, but I don't know that exactly. That's a good question to ask them. If we are looking at doing a Motion Array thing, it might. The last time I did a Motion Array video, before I did that, actually before I've done almost all my videos, like Pond 5 and Motion Array, I have gone to them with questions, and they have sent me back answers that I was able to relate to the video.
Yeah.
And so we should do that too. We should
You're
find out those
right.
pressing questions.
Yeah, totally. I should write them, and they are very responsive. I like that about them.
Just ask, and you do it this time, and just ask them. We'll have a list of questions to find out stuff that we know people ask us all the time.
Totally.
Why does it take so long to get in the beginning? How long? Why does it take so long? I don't think 12 days is out of the realm of. I think that's 12 days is fine for me to wait to get my songs in there. Crucial Music, to get those songs reviews is 2 months, and some places are longer than that. So, for a quality library like Motion Array, you just have to plan. If you want something in at the first of the month, you better start in the middle of the month, putting it in. So
that's it. Exactly.
You know how that goes.
Exactly.
So plus that, besides that brief, I had 3 more approved this week at Motion Array. And so that library is growing now to getting close to 120 things in that library. I really am trying to get that up to 150 or 200. I think in my particular case, I'm going to have a quantity up that is findable for people, rather than being the superstar cool guy like Stevie B. And because I don't do that music just because I don't a lot of times. I have some things coming up that I've been working on that are maybe down that road, and we'll see if they accept them and see how they do. But usually I'm just putting up goofy Twilight Zone type of things, and the Latin jazz is what all got in this week, so
Sweet.
but one of my Latin jazz songs that I put up last year is still my biggest seller on there, so who knows. I had an 100 audio sale
Oh, really?
this week, and for like $40, and
Interesting.
all that makes me do is just sigh and say, okay, now I'm going to have to put more up there, because whenever a library pays me, and they've never paid me or they haven't paid me in a long time, I'm thinking, okay, maybe I do need to put a few more songs up there, because I only have like 10 or 15 songs up there. Mm-hmm. And as we know, that's just not enough. Some guy asked on our Discord today, how can I do better in Audio Jungle? I've got like 10 songs up there, or 20 songs up there. I'm like put 200 songs up there. Get as many as you can. Same with Pond 5, all that. So I've got a nice November. I'm not getting a payment from 100 Audio. I haven't had that many sales, and that sounds painful. The process I've heard about from 100 Audio to get paid.
I think it's quite a deduction, and with the transfer fees and all that too. So I actually don't know what the percentage ends up being that is reduced from all the international transferring and everything. But I think it's pretty rough. You
were a big proponent of them at one time and did a video on them in VFine. Have you ever made any money from either?
No, I've never gotten. I've had a couple sales in VFine that are still sitting there. VFine always struck me as the library that you need to keep feeding in order to get sales. With 100 Audio, I got a lot of sales right away, and I'm almost at the threshold for payment. But I lost steam there once I started getting more involved with Artlist, and things started to really pick up in Motion Array, and I just kind of put all my energy into that. So I've never. I should really I should upload it to 100 Audio and finally get that payout and see what it ends up being, just out of curiosity.
I'm going to put some more up there. I have a thing I signed with VFine where I can't put something up to both VFine and 100 Audio.
Can you get out of that?
So I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I don't, I have a lot to put up to 100 Audio that I haven't put up to VFine. I've stopped with VFine a little bit because there's just nothing happening there.
There's nothing
especially
happening.
The new thing they have.
Although my friend still, Topher, I believe he still gets sales on the old site.
That's dumb. I don't understand why that.
I know. I don't get it.
Either have the old site or the new site. What are you? I don't get it.
I'm not sure. Something fishy's going on over there.
I've never gotten sales on either of them. I've got one sale on the old site. It's going to be a nice November for royalty-free income because I'm getting an Audio Sparks check. I'm getting a Motion Array check. I'm getting a nice big fat Audio Jungle check that's been building over the past month or two. I've got a Pond 5 check. I'll have quite a few checks on the 15th. It's going to be a sweet 15th. Also a big paycheck for my other job, so it's going to be next 15th. It's going to be good. Nice. I'm also looking forward to my first Content ID payment from Identify, hopefully on the 31st is what they say on their site, October 31st. So fingers crossed. My account is all set. So waiting for that. That's going to help pay a bill or two. And then I have a lot of stuff going on with Crucial Music right now. More pitches going up to them, 2 acceptances into their brand new cover thing, and one signed early this week, finally, like on the bottom line signed, because you got to go through a lot of steps to get it in. And so one is in the library, and then another one is just waiting a few more signatures to get in, because I have some partners on that. I did Hello Composer episode yesterday live. Very long, but very fun. At least it was long, but it was fun. Also, those are always fun to do, and just the channel is slowly growing, and it's kind of cool. Again, it's a hobby and just a fun side channel, but it works so in groove with make music income, because it's the other side of the making music income, just the making music part, which I rarely have time to talk about except with you on the channel, because I'm so focused on income type things. But that went yesterday, and that was called What Do You Compose? Like, how do you choose what to compose? And I'm trying to hit kind of a lot of the basics with this, and really just, this channel is for beginners and media and intermediate. It's not for, I had Sammy J. Lane on there yesterday.
Oh, nice.
And he brought a trailer song on, and it was incredible. And he is a very, very high-end trailer composer.
Yes.
But the majority of people on there are still needing help. They're still needing to learn. They're still, and that's been kind of my client. I have a teacher's heart, and I teach at school, and I teach recording and composition at school. And so I enjoy teaching on that channel.
Totally.
I did a little bit of short media this week with Adam Ivy, one of the Adam Ivy clips. And I have a brand new class this week, just started Monday. So it's been an exciting week with 15 students, which is the largest class I've had yet. And so it's very interesting. Average age of about 26, which is cool, I think, to teach people who are anywhere from 19 to 30s, late 30s, and everybody in between. And a lot of people coming in with some knowledge, which is not the case, that have already worked in DAWs and things like that. So it's going to be a fun class. And then other than that, just client mixes and client. No, all good students. Nice. No slackers. It doesn't seem like yet. We'll find out when we get into Pro Tools Monday. And that's when the slacking starts to begin. If there's slacking going to come, because
when you start to get into Pro Tools, principal's office,
when you get into routing and you get into automation, that's stuff when people start to go. They start to. Right now, we're just talking about, what do you think about this song? How do you feel about audio? Here's how do you critically listen to audio. Next week, it's like, here's Pro Tools. All right, let's start mixing. And here's how to do automation. And here's how to do dynamic effects and time-based effects and all that kind of stuff. And here's how to route them. And it's not like Logic. It's, there's literal routing you have to do to a literal channel that you have to set up. So it's a lot. So at that point, that's when you start to see who's going to enjoy it and stick with it, and who's going to kind of fade and kind of fall back. But anyway, that's what's happening on my week. How about you?
Like a channel fader, just fading down.
It's like a fader, yes. Some stay up at 0, some stay below or above 0, some just fall down, all the way down.
My week's been good, man. I'm, as you can see, I'm wearing a really cozy house coat.
I thought you were in a robe. I thought you were in a robe. You need like a pipe, and you'd be like Hugh Hefner.
Yeah, it's a real smoking room jacket. It's very fuzzy and warm, and it's a terrible day here. It's raining.
Is
it's
it cold?
It's windy. I was going to go for a run this morning, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take the day off from that. It was my 40th birthday on Tuesday, so my wife got me this.
Oh, happy birthday!
This
I didn't
nice
know that.
jacket. Thank you.
You kept that secret.
Yeah, I don't like.
You
to
didn't share that with
big
anybody.
Stink about that.
Everybody needs to send Stevie happy birthday messages that sees this.
You don't.
The chat will go crazy if you go live, if you go premiere.
So yeah, this is a nice little birthday gift for me, which is
nice.
So I'm wearing it on a day in which I need it. But yeah, the week's been good. I've just been writing a ton of material. I'm doing some tension cues for one library. I'm doing some pop tracks and dramedy for another. I'm working on a new project for Artlist Originals, more singer-songwriter stuff. I'm also finishing up some lo-fi tracks for them. I'm starting to get back into the trailer music world, and that's one of the reasons I actually built my PC, because I'm going to be running some pretty CPU-intensive sessions, lots of orchestral libraries and such. I'm going to be breaking down one of my hip-hop dramedy tracks for the Academy today. I'm going to be editing and posting that right up in the Academy as soon as we're done. Doing more Zoom consultations, more one-on-one talks, which I really, really am enjoying so much. It's just been awesome to connect with some of the members of the Academy. Some of these folks have been members for quite a long time, so it's just really nice to kind of have like a face-to-face chat with them. Yeah, I've been really enjoying that.
Is that part of your Academy? Is that an extra?
That's a thing I'm kind of offering. Yeah, it's a service I'm offering, like just in the Academy only right now because I have very limited free time, but want to open it up to everyone at some point soon. My Halloween track. Speaking of what was the Twilight Zone. Speaking of it wasn't really a Twilight Zone-ish track, but it was like a Halloween trap song. It's called Ghostly Gangsters, and it did really well.
Ghostly what?
On Ghostly Gangsters. And it did well on Motion Ray this last month. It was number one actually for a little while, and I think it's been knocked out of that position for a bit. But it'll be another solid payout for this month. Not as crazy as last month, but it'll be a good one. And man, I got to send them some new tracks. Actually, I just come to think of it, I'm running late for November. So I got to get on
hit
that.
It at this point. You're not going to hit the first at this point.
Yeah, definitely not going to hit the first. Other than that, I think that's about it for my week. Just, kind of hunkering down and writing a lot. I've been kind of neglecting my social media as usual. I haven't been able to post anything on Instagram. I barely got a YouTube video in this week. It's been tough, but I don't know. I'm just trying to prioritize the writing part of my life and getting some new material out there. So let's talk about mixing.
Let's do it.
I made some notes for today, and I was thinking about this because I was chatting with one of the members about some of these concepts that have really helped me to sort of improve the way I think about mixing, and some things I picked up along the way. Because mixing is so tough. It's really, really tough. It's a mix of intuition and experience and listening skills and just, I don't know, knowledge about tools but also just it's kind of like a dark art. It's very hard to teach it, I think, and I think it just takes time to develop the skill. But there's 3 concepts that I want to discuss, and you can let me know what you think. I'll just start one at a time here.
Okay.
The first concept is focus. So this is mostly this pertains mostly to the idea of volume balancing, which I think is kind of like one of the more key concepts in mixing. It's like what elements of the track are going to be playing like the foreground, midground, and background roles. I think that this is often like really the most critical aspect of your mix, and also the one that I hear folks struggle with the most. I think it's really important to always ask ourselves what is the core, what's at the root of the track's statement. Is it the piano? Is it a synth melody? It could even be the drums in some cases, but we need to decide who's the star of the show and who's playing the more supportive role and who's working behind the scenes. And we adjust the volume of those roles accordingly. It seems simple enough, that concept, but a very common problem I hear in people's mixes is that there's one too many foreground ideas happening at once. Excuse me, meaning there's more than one star of the show. And I think that that's a problem because our brains aren't really wired for that. I can't have 2 very specific ideas fighting with each other in a mix, competing for my attention, because it ultimately means that both suffer. What do you think of that?
Yeah. I always tell people what my particular, when I talk to students about how to mix what they're hearing, I kind of, what I will do is look and then I will listen. I tell people not to look at the waves, not to look at the signals, and use their ears more. We're doing a lot of critical listening talk this week in the class before we get into any making of audio or listening to audio or mixing of audio. And so one of the exercises they had to do last night was one half of the class watched a song on a video without any sound, and the other half of the class had to listen in headphones without the video. And they all had to identify what they were either hearing in the headphones or what they were seeing on the video. And the people who listened heard probably 20% more things than the people watching the video saw. It's because our ears are probably stronger in a lot of ways, and also the video is not showing every single thing being played all the time, but our ears are really focusing when you don't have that video to focus on. And so what I try to do is close my eyes and I listen to the mix and all the instruments that I have, and I'm literally trying to mix them together, which means hear everything without hearing only one thing.
Yeah.
Now, if it's the piano that is it's a piano led tune, of course the piano is going to need to be heard. But I do a lot of vocal music. I've mixed a lot of vocals this week, and I'm still working on one. And the trick with that is the vocal has to be the focal point of the mix. But at the same time, it can't just be the only focal point. Like we got a song in yesterday on our Hello Composers broadcast where the vocal was there, but it was so wide in its tone, and it had so much range of frequency from low to high that it was whenever the vocal came in, everything else was kind of like blocked behind it. It was so in the foreground. And so that you can't barely even hear the midground anymore because all the frequencies are covering up all the other frequencies,
Yeah.
So turning up the bass is not going to help when your vocal has tons of bass in it in those same frequencies. So
we're going to get to masking. That's
okay.
That's another
thing.
So yeah.
I just try to listen and I go through all the instruments in my mind. Can I hear the snare pretty good consistently?
Yeah.
Can I hear the kick consistently? I mean, I start from the beginning. I'm a top-down mixer, and top is the drum set, and so I will start kick and sometimes bass, but kick, snare, hat, everything. I just try to go through the checklist of all the instruments, and if I look at anything, I'm looking at the tracks and going, am I seeing all of those things? I mean, hearing all of those things when I close my eyes evenly. Is something hidden? We'll talk about that in a minute, and how to unhide it, but that's how I go. I just go through a checklist and make sure. And if it's the vocal, I'm listening to the vocal and saying, can I still hear the band consistently with the vocal, but yet the vocal be, just like what you were saying, the vocal be the main thing I'm hearing and understanding the words without losing the rest of the band and everything they're doing. It's a subtle art.
It's very subtle, man. Yeah.
But I think if you are very careful with trying to identify, making sure every instrument is in there somewhere. It doesn't have to be loud. Maybe that electric guitar that's going doesn't need to be like really high. Just as long as you can identify it by closing your eyes and say, yeah, I hear it in there. It's there. It's subtle. It doesn't need to be super loud. And it's doing its job.
That's just it. It doesn't need to be super loud. And that's the thing. It's just like a lot of the elements in a mix, they're not exactly present in terms of being like foreground focused material in your mix, but if you took them away, you would be missing something. And that's where some of these midground and background elements are really important. Is that there's presence there, but they don't have to be. And as soon as you kind of push them, crank them up, and they're sitting right at the front of your mix, then it doesn't make any sense anymore. And it's just encroaching on the territory of whoever is the star of the show, and that could be that could be the vocals, for example. You push that guitar up loud enough, and then all of a sudden it's in the vocal territory. So, and like you said, it's extremely the subtleties. It's just all subtlety, because I think that the volume balancing aspect of your mix is subtlety, in a nutshell. I mean, like. And I think that finding the place for the drums and the bass to sit is like a classic example. Like those are often too loud in mixes and taking up too much real estate, and they don't need to be. Like, because if you feel them in the background, then they're doing their job. And and it's genre dependent too. Sometimes like in a rock mix or something, like the guitars will be really loud and they'll be right up there with the vocals. But
It also depends on who and how it was recorded. You know, I get so much stuff from Nashville that was recorded so well that I could literally pull up the session and basically just play it. You know, and the drums are consistent, the guitars are consistent, everything's consistent because a master engineer recorded it and it came in that way.
Yeah,
It didn't.
right.
You don't have to make it good on the outgo. But you know, it's not much different with samples because samples and MIDI instruments from Logic or different things like that, those are all pretty already compressed and well recorded. They're made for to sit with everything else. Everything is made in these things to kind of go together, and they're all recorded well by professionals. Spitfire stuff, you know, Spectrasonic stuff. They're all made very well. Now, how you play them and how dynamic you are with each of them is going to make them sound weird. But I think people need to understand. I see we always go to compression. And I know we're not there yet, but we always go to compression in order to bring stuff up when really we're probably dealing with samples that have already been compressed. And so that's not a good, I've read that somewhere in the past 10 years that, hey, if you've got a great sound from Native Instruments or a great sound from your synthesizer, remember that wave was already made in a studio and compressed and put in there. You don't need to add a lot of compression to keyboard sounds.
That's right.
Now, a kick drum, that's an actual kick drum that was recorded by an actual person or it's a sample. Yeah, maybe that's something that's on there. So, yeah, that's my two thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Over compression is a thing to look out for, especially when you're using VST.
Over everything. I mean,
over everything.
I've had some students go through and EQ and compress every single track.
Yeah.
And I this time when we get into that mixing phase, I'm going to tell them only EQ, and because they have to do so many, you know, like do 2 EQs, do 3 compressions, do this, you know, for their exercises. But I'm going to really work on them and say, listen to the sound first. If it doesn't need compression, don't compress it. If it needs EQ, be very gentle with the dynamic, the range of frequency that you bring up. Don't just go, you know, make all the way up or all the way down or whatever. Just be careful with the sounds. Now, a lot of times they're dealing with horribly recorded sounds, so they're trying to do something.
Yeah, and there's not much you can do with a horribly recorded sound, unfortunately. Yeah. Unfortunately, whatever you do will just make it sound probably more horrible because we.
But I would bet you the people that we're talking to right now are dealing with a lot of well-recorded samples and things like that.
That's right. You know? That's right. Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, so focus is the first concept I wanted to touch on, and you know, I think back to like a classic example of this is like I had back like 10 years ago. So I was in this like funk band, and the guy who was writing all the songs, he wanted to take it upon himself to record and like mix the record. It was like his little project, and we recorded it really well. We recorded it in a good studio, and it was all instrumental funk music, and the mixes that he had initially, like his demos and everything, it was like a classic case of like everything being as loud as everything else, and there was no like everything was just competing for the same space, and it was hard to listen to because it was like you just didn't know what to listen to. You didn't know what the composer wanted you to listen to, and you know the way I saw it was that the brass lines, like the melodic structure of the music was like the statement that was like the core energy of the track, and you know the way I saw it, that should be kind of like a focus point that should be up front, and some of the other elements like the drums and the bass could sit a little bit behind that, and the keys especially, and they're more supportive. And so we made adjustments on that level, and it sounded a lot better, you know. So when we kind of decided what was, you know, like, because when you do a mix, you kind of have to, you're making decisions about what you want people to listen to the most, like, you know, and you can't have somebody pay attention to everything all at once. Yeah. And especially when there's vocals, you know, like, because our ears are just drawn to vocals naturally, I think, you know, when we listen to music. So that has to be a focus point. So anyway, let's move on. Next concept is dimension. And dimension for me refers to thinking about your mix in terms of its height, width, and depth. And this is kind of a weird concept to some people, but it's one that helps me because I don't want my mixes to sound one-dimensional. And the way that I get away from that is thinking about volume in terms of a track's height. We already talked about volume balancing. I think about the stereo field in terms of the width of the track. And I think about the depth in terms of what sounds close and intimate and what sounds distant. And on top of that, I think about how do these dimensions all interface with each other, and how do we move fluidly within those fields. So a good mix, or an interesting mix, is one that's not static. We need to, explore movement within the dimensions themselves in order to build interest in the track. So things can move closer or further away, in a track. Things, moving left and right in the stereo field, for example. Things getting quieter or louder. These dynamics are really, really important. I think that really helps our track feel alive. I think about how to use automation specifically to kind of push and pull within the space that of each of these dimensions to create tension and build excitement throughout the track. And I think that this is the really magical aspect of mixing that very often gets overlooked, and it's an aspect that we can use to kind of help us build narrative throughout the structure of our songs.
Yeah, I often tell students, if I only gave you EQ and panning, you could probably mix pretty well, and volume control. You could probably mix pretty well, but EQ can actually do volume control. In other words, you could use EQ. Yeah, so you could use EQ to control the sound of things. Panning is the other thing. One of the things that we talked about the other night during the history of recorded sound was the invention of stereo, or the introduction of stereo equipment in the 40s and 50s. And I'm like, you have no idea how big a deal this is, because you're used to stereo at everything. And you literally walk around with 2 stereo receivers on your head all day long. Yeah, and exactly, so we live in stereo. The reason there's a tiger coming from over here is you hear the rah and the footsteps, or the reason there's a car coming over here, or someone saying something to you over here, is because you have this ear over here that's hearing that. And so I talk about there's nothing better for mixing than putting everything in its place around the stereo spectrum. And especially vocals, background vocals, especially anything that is basically not kick drum or the human voice, as far as the main singer, maybe the snare drum, even though I've heard some people talk about putting the snare drum slightly left or right, depending on your drummer perspective. Yeah. The hi-hat, certainly. I mean, you can take a drum set that you get 7 files for, and you get hi-hat as one of them in the toms or other things, and maybe even overheads or the other thing. And instantly, by using panning, you get a wide-sounding, lovely drum set versus you get a lovely panned stereo drum set. Yeah. And that's just by panning. You've done nothing to the drum set yet other than pan it, and suddenly it sounds great. Yeah. And it's the same with background vocals, where you have a group of 3 or 4 or 6 or whatever. You can put those people all around the stereo spectrum and have a great sound. Put them in certain places, keep it tight, keep it wide. All sorts of things you can do there. You can bring out an instrument that you can't hear just by simply panning it over to the left or right to 25 degrees or something like that. Just a little bit, so that suddenly it has its own space. In the orchestra, when we see an orchestra live, we're seeing the orchestra laid out across the stage. The violins are stage are to the left if you're looking at it. Yeah. And then the violas and then the cellos are to the right of the conductor, and then the double basses are farther to the bass. And then everything in the orchestra has its place. And so these are things to know from a stereo perspective if you're mixing orchestral things. Now, a lot of times these samples are going to already be they're going to be stereo samples already in their place in where the orchestra, where they should be. That's right. But a band wouldn't be any different. There's other things that you could mix. And man, I just can't talk about how important the stereo field is in mixing.
It's so important.
Because it's the secret weapon of how to separate instruments from each other.
Yeah,
If you've got two electric guitars,
Yeah.
pan them separately from each other so that they don't get in each other's way.
Yeah, there's certain instruments like guitars that are just absolutely
It's magic.
sound amazing.
Two
when you
acoustics
pan it.
playing the
yeah,
same
two
thing.
acoustics panned is just lovely.
Oh man.
And I mean, yeah, it's just, I mean, people get crazy with the panning sometimes. It's like, sometimes I think that, like hard panning things isn't always it depends. It depends. It's very subjective, but yeah, like I'll do things like, with like a verse vocal, for example, like, will be tight, down the middle, and then have the background sort of like pan further out to sort of elevate the space, or like push the space of where that vocal is happening in the chorus, just to kind of build some energy. And these things are dynamic throughout the mix, right? We can push and we can pull that energy. It doesn't have to be static and the same throughout the whole mix. And so I think it's really important to kind of play with these dimensions, and same with depth too, like using reverb in the right places, and like having sort of like, the lower energy kind of be focused and intimate, having some of the the higher frequency ranges be you can play with the field, and create some ambience with things sounding further away, and that creates a sense of depth in the track, so it doesn't all sound like it's enclosed in this like little box. You want it to kind of feel like you're in the room with the music. So you have to reflect that with the way you're using reverb and delay and that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's two kinds of effects that we preach to the students, and one is dynamic effects, which is EQ and compression and things like that, and then we get into the time-based effects, which is reverb and delay mainly, but also chorus and modulation things.
Yeah.
But those are huge. Now, I did want to say, while you're talking about reverb, unless you're going to go farther into effects, are you going to go into effects further, or is that on your list? Or
no, we can.
Or let me just say what I'm going to say about it now, because this is one of the things I wrote down originally. Yeah. And this is what I tell my students. They are all like, how many reverbs should I put in this? And I'm like, well, I'd put one in, because my thought is, especially if let's say I'm mixing a rock band, I am going to use generally one good verb, and I'm going to let everybody have a part of that verb. And depending on where I want them in the mix, I will give them less or more of that reverb. And the reason I do that is because if I'm mixing a band that's in the same room together, but they didn't cut in the same room together, which is usually the case in studios where the drums are in a room, and the piano's in a room, and the guitar player's in his amps in a room, and all that kind of stuff, is I'm going to, a lot of times, now I'm not talking about delays so much here, as much as reverb and the space that you're listening to of the mix. But especially if you're just starting out, don't throw on a ton of different kinds of reverbs. Start with one good verb and think, okay, this space is a stage in a warehouse, and what am I trying to accomplish with the sound of this mix? And that way you can use your room and really crank it on your room sound, or your room mics. You can keep it less cranked on what's close, what's right up next to the thing. Your overheads might have a little bit more on it. Like right away with a mix, I compress the kick, I compress the snare, I put a little of the verb on the snare, I put the little verb on the overheads, and I pan the drums accordingly, and that's my drum mix. It's kind of like one of the first things I put on my list here was mix as you go, and these are things that I do right away with every single mix. It's like I call it the Eric Copeland School of Speed Mixing, because I have this just list of things that I'll just go doing right away. It's not in a template necessarily, but I will go through and just do these things right away, and put compression on the kick and snare, and really that's all at first, and maybe on the bass, but usually not, again, because it's been recorded well. But I think the same room idea, as far as verbs, is a good place to start for beginners or people who are just starting with mixing. Now, do different things need different reverbs for different effects? Sure. But personally, I just start with the same room. And then if I need more effects for certain things, then I will do that. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think it totally depends, because I tend to use different reverbs on different types of reverbs on different tracks, with different decays, different levels of wet and dry mix. But yeah, I mean, for sure, there's definitely some advantages to using, like, say, an auxiliary reverb and like bussing multiple instruments into that, so that it has kind of a more cohesive feel to it, and it sounds like it's all in the same room.
And that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about putting the same verb on every channel. I'm talking about bussing of all the channels, or the channels I'm using, to a one effect.
Yeah, no, I get it. And you're also saving on CPU power, especially too. I do a bit of both. I tend to, in terms of mixing as you go, I tend to, apply some like light processing to the ideas and the instruments that I'm putting into the track as I go along. And then I kind of do some further adjustments when I start grouping instruments together. That's always been my style. But I think, in terms of how you're applying reverb, whether it be on track or tracks individually or as an auxiliary or a tool, then it depends. Each has its benefits and its drawbacks, and I think it depends on the genre a bit too.
Sure.
But yeah, certainly putting an auxiliary reverb on like a drum set mix, for example, might make sense in a lot of cases. Sometimes orchestral type tracks that do that kind of thing. And yeah, I mean,
that's a whole video we could go into.
Exactly. It is
just on reverb.
These are such dense subjects, and people make whole hour-long videos about this kind of stuff. It's hard.
Yeah, and you can find that. We're just trying to give you some hints on how to get your mixes sounding better quickly. And I think some of these things like EQ, panning, automation is another thing. You were talking about movement earlier, and I think that when we teach automation, the whole question about it is, or the whole thought about it is how a mix can have movement. Is that automation can happen, bringing things up and down in volume, bringing things up and down. I will automate reverb a lot of times where I want something to have some more or less of the verb, or more of the dimensions of the verb, or whatever. Mm-hmm. I don't really do a ton of panning automation. I think that can get really old, but I can see why people would use it on certain things, and students do it all the time just because they think, oh, this is fun. It's going back and forth and back and forth. I'm like, yeah, you're making me sick. Stop doing it. I'm getting seasick. But I think automation is
disorienting.
Important.
Actually, yeah, you're right. I do some panning automation, but it's usually never like extreme.
It's subtle,
left,
probably.
right. Yeah, it's more subtle. There's a great plugin I use actually by Output called Movement. It does automation like filtering, delay, and panning automation all at once. It's very, very cool. Check it out if you want to add some easy movement ideas to your track. Let's move on to the third and the last concept here, which is tone shaping. We could have everything super balanced in terms of volume in our mix. And we may be using, the dimensions that we were just talking about to its maximum potential. But perhaps we're still struggling with masking issues. So this is something we touched on a bit earlier, but I want to revisit it because what masking refers to really is the frequency overlap between instruments in your mix. So if your mix is sounding kind of really muddy, for example, it's often because there's masking in your lower mid-range, for instance. So this is common, especially common when using orchestral libraries. Say, for example, if you're using, or if you have the brass and the strings kind of both resonating somewhere in that lower mid-range, you might need to do some like carving or some tone shaping with the EQ to help them live better side by side. Now, oftentimes, our masking issues are actually just a result of arrangement issues. So a great example of that would be stacking like thirds and fifths in like too closely together in the lower register of an instrument. And this is something that's really important to remember because the lower you get in an instrument's register, the more energy there is, and the more you need to space things out because the audible overtones in those lower ranges will clash with each other. So that aside, we can often make really subtle adjustments, like or like low or high pass filtering, to cut out the unnecessary clutter in our mixes. And while it might be unnoticeable by taking that approach on one instrument, it really adds up in the end. Especially if you have a lot of instruments in your mix. So, for instance, I use a lot of synths in my lo-fi tracks, and they often carry this information in like the sub ranges or like and the lower ranges that just isn't necessary in the mix. So I'll do a lot of high pass filtering on them, meaning I'm letting the higher frequencies pass through and I'm shutting out the sub range completely. Other times my electric guitar, for example, will have some low level like hiss on the high end, a bit of a noise floor, and sometimes I'll just cut out the highs with a low pass filter. And these types of like really simple like tone shaping exercises with an EQ, it's a really powerful tool. It's going to be able to add a lot of clarity to your mixes, but it's such a powerful tool that I think that you actually have to be really careful when using it. You have to show some restraint and not cut too drastically. And that's like a rookie move is doing too much cutting and like getting rid of some of those frequencies that you actually need, thinking that maybe they were causing some of the masking issues. So it's a difficult thing.
I have two examples of what you're talking about here. I was mixing this morning, and I have a beautiful cello sound in this song that I'm mixing with a lady who's singing in a general alto range, and she ends on a C, a middle C,
right,
out of this phrase, and I have a cello. Well, my first thought was the cello would sound beautiful right in that area as doing a little transitional movement type of thing. Well, the problem is if she's holding out a D and a C and I start playing that cello around D or C, because of the sound of the cello, because of the sound of her particular voice, one of them's going to be masked. So I couldn't do that. I had to either do a high melody or a low type of thing on the cello or whatever, because the vocal is the winner, right? The vocal gets first importance. But the other thing that I want to say is that don't play a chord below middle C. This is like one of the things I tell students all the time. You're going to be tempted, especially with they have little 2-octave keyboards in front of them, and they're too lazy to even press sometimes the octave button. But they'll find a chord and they'll just be told you got to put a chord in. So they'll play a chord and it's like bong. Yeah, it's like a noise, an octave below middle C, and it's just a full chord. And I'm like, listen, you've got to play your chords above middle C. No, we don't play chords down there because of all the overtones that creates. And that's a simple thing, but you'd be surprised how many people are put, like you said, thirds and fifths, and we don't even want to get into music theory about parallel fifths and all that kind of stuff, but low frequency chords cause problems. And so many people with synthesizers and string sounds and all that stuff are having cellos play 1, 3, 5, below middle C, and it's just going to cause you a lot of issues.
Yeah.
So
same with brass, like the lower brass, like trombones and
space
and
those
like
chords out.
Sometimes.
You got octaves you can space chords out, and you don't have to make it 1, 3, 5. You can put 1, 5, 3, or 1, 3, 1, and then go up an octave and put the 3, and then the 5 can be. I mean, there's so many things you can do, and invert chords and all that kind of stuff. But watch your chords below middle C. That's just a issue I see especially with new musicians who are trying to figure out how to make beats or make tracks. Is that they are putting chords low, and it messes everything up.
It's a simple thing. It's a simple thing to pay attention to, and it makes a massive difference when you get out of that habit.
Play bass in the bass range. You don't play bass up here. You play bass down here. This is where the bass is played, and also know what your bass can play. I just am putting a video together that I talked about last week in Hell Composers about. When I play bass, I try to think like a bass player. Where does a bass player play, and what are the limitations of a modern bass? Not an affected bass or a bass with pedals or anything strange like that. But the regular bass you pick up off the wall, it goes down to E. Yeah. There is a note that it goes down to. Most basses on most stages are going to play an E as their lowest bass unless they're tuned down for some reason, or they're it's an upright or a fretless or something. But that might be a difference. But anyway, that's getting more into the things. But what you're talking about is the tones that get down there and just the frequencies that mess everything up. And if you don't want to get into a lot of EQing, just don't don't make the mistake of putting stuff in each other's frequencies. You can do that. That's almost a mix as you go thing. Be careful you're not overplaying, in a certain area frequency area. So.
Yeah, and I think EQ, speaking to it being such a powerful tool, it's one of these things that I think, and I'm sure you notice this with your students. As soon as you get an EQ and you see an EQ for the first time, like a digital one especially, you're just boosting. Like,
oh yeah,
like that.
It's so awesome.
That part of the instrument sounds awesome. Let's boost it. EQ is really, it's meant to be more of a, like, I use it more as a reductive tool rather than or a subtractive tool, right, where I'm getting rid of things I don't need. You don't necessarily have to boost the things that you like. You can just do that by turning it up.
And if you do it subtly. Do it in small little bumps,
sometimes
not big, huge loops.
Yeah, right. I mean, just thinking back, I mean, this is stuff I used to do. Over compress, over EQ, over boost, everything. It's subtle, but
I try to use compression as little as possible.
I try to ease back on it too, and it depends, because sometimes the genre asks for some pretty aggressive compression. Sometimes when I'm doing lo-fi, like hip hop, for example, could really push the compression on the drums to color it in a certain way. But with EQ, I think it's like the opposite of the boost problem is like taking too much away problem. And I sometimes I'm guilty of this. Even now, I do things like take too much low mids out of my acoustic guitars sometimes, in an effort to try to make them sit in the mix better. But sometimes I'll lose that really, really important information in the low mids, and like depending on how the mix shapes up, like sometimes you really want to represent that. And it's tempting to get rid of them because they sound so like honky, but you actually need them more than you realize.
And again, for new mixers, don't for things that are already recorded. Now, if you're recording your own guitars and your own basses and your own drums, that's a different deal, because you got to know how to record them in the first place well. Mm-hmm. And if you don't record them well, then you might have to do more fixing with EQs and compression and things like that. But if you're talking about samples, if you're talking about beats or loops that you already have that are on the computer already that come with Logic or whatever you're working with, there's not a lot of affecting you have to do. You don't have to go in and boost a lot of stuff in the EQs of those instruments. They're pretty much the way they should sound, or the way they wanted them to sound. Yeah. So you don't have to take that cello and, in order to get it to cut, really boost up that mid-range or lower mid-range. It's going to do that on its own if it's a good sample. Yeah. And I just think that could be overused a lot. And again, with things that have already been recorded for you in sample libraries, you do not need to be compressing them a lot, most probably.
It's all relative to how things are working together. It's like it's like a sample by itself might sound amazing, but you might need to do some tone shaping to it in order for it to live appropriately in its lane in the mix. And that's ideally where, I think you want everything living in its own lane, and not fighting with each other too much. That's part
of my mix as I go, though. I tend not to choose things that are going to fight with something else. Just as now, sometimes you can't help it, but I just try to, garbage in, garbage out. Just don't put garbage in. Yeah. And so if you already have something in a range, no reason to add another instrument to that range that's going to compete with it. Go into another direction and another frequency range with another instrument, or with the other instrument, or whatever. Yeah, totally. You want to talk real quick about some quick mastering things? What else you got before this?
I mean, mastering is such a dense subject. We're almost at an hour.
I just wanted to say one thing that we started to do when I first started teaching with these students is that they said, we don't want to get too much into letting them master things. In other words, let's not put too many limiters on, let them get too into limiting their master bus. And so at the first two classes, I didn't let them use L2 at all. Or I should say any kind of limiting at all. Now, some of them did because they were smart and they already knew about limiting. But most of them just tried their best to get a good mix, which is very hard when you have loud and soft things happening, to get a good sounding and then the guy who take over next, who does the next stage and stuff, it says, man, the gain staging is horrible because it's so low, it's so quiet, and so I'm letting them do more like light limiting, basically just stopping it from going over, 0 or -1 or something like that,
Yeah,
just so that
doing
they
some
can,
light
just
clipping.
yeah, just so we don't have any clipping.
Yeah,
And I do that with every mix. I'm doing it on this right now. I have what I call initial L2. L2 is a Waves plug-in. It's basically it's just a limiter, the L2 multi-maximizer. I've had it for literally 20 something years or more, and it is just
Waves, right? Classic
Waves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It comes in the mastering package, which is what I have. I have the mastering bundle,
Mm-hmm.
and but I'm not going to go into the mastering, my mastering stuff, but start with have a limiter on when you're starting work, just so that you keep things under control and you're working at a reasonable volume the whole time, versus coming into the end and going, okay, everything's too loud. Now what do I do? And by having a limiter, just a simple limiter, it's not doing anything. The threshold is way up high. It's not pushing, it's not squeezing, it's not doing anything, but it's just letting everything through without letting it get too loud. That way you can use appropriate volumes as you're mixing and mixing as you go, and making sure that, and where things sound good. I know that it's about 11 o'clock or 11:30 on this particular interface where I like to hear things here or hear things in the speaker. I know that's about where I like it, and I know that's what's going to translate out of here, and by keeping things at about minus zero .5 dB, I nothing gets louder than that. It's loud enough. But I don't squash it super. Even when I master, I'm not a big squasher. I know you do for certain styles that you do, just because they have to be.
Yeah,
but
it depends.
And generally,
again, it's like one of those really subjective things. It's like, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole with mastering, because it's just such a subject. But yeah, I mean, I don't work with like a limiter on my master bus. I just keep very close attention to the gain staging and where the peaks are. But I think that's a good call.
Mine's not doing anything. It's just keeping it from clipping.
No, I hear you. I hear you. I think it's I think just like understanding limiting alone for your students is a good place to start with it.
It's all introductory. I mean, I don't really teach them compression. I just show them how the threshold works, and how because you can get really deep into compression and limiting and all that kind of stuff, and I don't have time to do that. There's other professors that teach them that in later classes. So those are good concepts to learn, and you can learn that on YouTube just about anywhere. So
I think in conclusion here, just to reiterate the three things that I would consider every time you sit down and mix. And I'm not saying at the end of your composition, like Eric is mentioning here, like we both kind of mix as we go. And the three things that I try to think about is all the time is what's the focus of my track, what's in the foreground, what's in the background, how do I play with the dimensions, and how do I make things sound interesting with movement throughout the stereo field, depth, close, far away, and how do I shape everything tonally so that everything is kind of living in its own lane, sitting side by side, and not fighting with each other. Those are the three essential concepts that I think about every time I sit down to write a track, and I'm thinking about them throughout the entire process. So yeah, that's my.
Yeah, I would say neither of us probably go, okay, I've created this track now. When am I going to find time to mix it? Because it's usually pretty mixed by the time we get done.
It's usually pretty mixed. It's fine tuning when I get to the end part. Like I do a little fine tuning, but yeah, it's pretty mixed. Yeah.
And I would agree with all those things. The only other thing I would say, as far as the third point about everything living together, I also think about what space they're living together in. And that's just something that I do. And I think it's kind of old school, but it's just the way I like to think of things. Because you can have people putting all these effects in, and everything is in a different space. But that kind of goes to your third point, where if the drums are in this huge cavern, and the bass is really tight, and then the guitars are kind of in a little room, and everything, that doesn't mean they are not sitting together.
It doesn't sound connected. Things need to sound connected. Ideally. Yeah.
Cool, man. Yeah.
Good chat. Great chat.
I think that gives you a good kind of, I mean, this in no way is a mixing primer even, but it's just some things to look out for and think about as you're composing music and you're putting it down in your DAW. I think these are things that will certainly help you. These are our little lessons for you. So
just for you.
Just for you.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. Let us know what you guys think in the comments. Throw down some thoughts. Let us know if we missed anything. Yeah, I don't know. Let us know what your process is. We're always down to hear from you guys, and it's always great when we get the comments. And I guess we'll leave it there. That was fun.
Yep. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining us today, and we will talk at you next week here on the podcast and on YouTube.
That's right. See you soon. Bye.
See you later. Bye-bye.